where's Jonathan got to? It's not like him not to already be here waiting for us. Let's just hang on another minute, because I actually don't think Jonathan has missed all semester, so he may just have lost track of the time. Let's give him another minute or so to join us. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Can you believe we're in week 10?
Yeah, it's gone by fast.
So fast! It's nearly summertime, yes! So excited. Okay, well, I hope he's not sick. Let's pull up this PowerPoint. Okay, so this will be a pretty short little lecture, just to try to give you some hints and tips really for how to use some of the skills that you've learnt during this semester in your other classes. And it ties directly to chapter 25 in our textbook, which is called Effective Research Writing, and then chapter 4 in the HPE manual, which is Writing Style and Grammar. Okay, so I would strongly recommend that you read those two chapters. I think that they'll give you as well some really useful information to help you with your writing in your other graduate classes. So the goal today is to try to show you how to pull together. So at the end of the semester, we're going to have 6 annotated bibliographies from research papers that you've written. And if you were going to write a literature review using those papers, then you want to be able to, how do I cite the papers in the body of the writing? How do I synthesize ideas from the different papers and pull them all together, right? Because when you do a literature review, it isn't just paragraph 1 is this paper, paragraph 2 is this paper, paragraph 3 is the next paper, right? A literature review is here's the idea, and here are the papers that support that and what they say, right? So you've got to be able to synthesize this information ultimately. And whilst you're not going to write a lit review on these particular papers, you will have to write summaries and lit reviews in other classes where the idea is the same, okay? So that's the goal for today. And if it's just you and me, Michelle, then just yell anytime you need me to repeat something or if you've got a question about anything, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so using citations. So the chapter that's really going to give you the information on how to cite, so what's the format for citing. They have some tables that give you the basic kind of styles. So you're looking, that's going to be chapter 8 in your APA manual. Okay. So the difference between the citation and the reference is the element that we've been practicing that would go at the end of the paper. So you would either have a bibliography or a reference list at the end of the paper. Okay? The citation is the format to tell the reader that this is where you got the information you're talking about, actually within the text. And the rule here is that if it's cited in the paper, it has to be in the reference list. And if it's in the reference list, it has to be cited in the paper. So that's always something to double check yourself on, particularly if you're cutting and pasting, or you're adding material or taking material out of a project or a paper, that when you are ready to submit it, that you just double check that those two line up. Okay? Uh-oh, Michelle got kicked out, so now I'm talking to myself. Okay, so why do we use citations in the body of the work? All right, so the first one is to make sure that you can't be accused of plagiarism. And we talked a little bit about the severity of that accusation, and both your textbook and the APA manual talk to you about the problems around plagiarism. All right, so we don't want to say something in the paper that we learned somewhere else, and then not give the other resource the kudos for that piece of information. Okay, so good rule of thumb is to try to go to the primary resource. So if you're reading a paper and they cite another paper, when you are writing, it would be better to go and find the original paper that was cited and use that than to cite a secondary source, i.e. the paper where you found out about the primary source. Okay? So if you can, it's always better to go and locate the primary source. Sometimes you can't, and then you have to cite it as a secondary source, and they teach you how to do that in the chapter. All right? So you want to keep that kind of straight. In my view, it's better to oversight than undercite. So generally, if you are writing something and you have an idea in sentence 1, and then you have a different idea in sentence 2, it's better to cite the paper in sentence 1 and sentence 2 than get accused of plagiarism, right? But again, there are ways and means around that, okay? And there are ways of citing that doesn't make it boring for the reader, so we'll talk about that idea. The other main reason for citing is that it allows the reader to go and locate the original resource for themselves and read the whole resource if they want to. Okay? It doesn't mean that I have to necessarily summarize the information. So I might want to, right? It depends what it is that I'm using the paper for. So, for example, I did my research on cortisol and exercise. And so, you know, I would have to say cortisol has a diurnal pattern during the day. Well, obviously, I didn't find that out, right? That's been known for a long, long time, and so I have to cite one or two papers that say cortisol's a diurnal pattern. Now, I don't need to summarize those papers because we know cortisol is a diurnal pattern. But what I can do then is open parentheses and just put the author and the year in the parentheses as support for that statement I made. Okay? So it isn't always going to be a question of summarizing something from the paper. It may just be telling the reader that this paper has that information in it. So I hope that is making sense. Michelle's back now, so she'll catch me if I'm talking nonsense. All right? So I'm not always summarizing. Sometimes I'm just putting the author and the year in parentheses to support a statement that I make. The reader can go to the reference list, find that paper, go read that paper if they want to. Okay? There is a way to quote from a paper that you can learn in the APA manual as well, although I recommend that you minimize quoting as much as possible. All right? It's not good writing style to have tons and tons of quotes in your paper. Every now and then there's something that's so iconic that to reword it would be, you know, it's like, I have a dream. Who would reword I have a dream, right? We're going to quote that in a paper. But to have too many quotes is kind of lazy writing, right? So you want to minimize the use of quotes as much as possible and use the idea of synthesizing, summarizing, or just using the paper to back up a statement that you make. All right, so use this citation idea more than quoting from a paper. Okay? Oops. That is not the next slide. There we are. All right, so when we're talking about the writing, all right, you'll find as you're reading research papers that the writing can be quite formal, particularly if it's quantitative research. I find qualitative papers are a little less formal in their writing style sometimes, not always, but sometimes. But it's still important that the information flows through the paper, all right? So when you're writing, you want to make the reading of your paper as pleasant as possible for the reader, right? I don't want to have to be going, oh wait, didn't they just say something about that back here? What was it? Right? I don't want to have to jump around. I don't want ideas to be suddenly abstract out of nowhere and there they are in the middle of the paper when we've had no discussion about this concept whatsoever up to that point, right? So it's important that we lead the reader on with our ideas, okay? So I always like to use an idea that I was taught in my research classes at Auburn, is that you want to try to funnel your reader in to your final point, right? So in our case, our final point would be our purpose statement. And so the idea is to start out quite broad, introduce lots of information, and then gradually chunk it down until you get to the point at the end of the introduction or literature review where the reader goes, oh, okay, yeah, I absolutely get why this is an important question, right? And you can apply that same idea to your other papers, okay? Start out relatively broad and bring the reader with you as you narrow down your argument. Okay? Excuse me. And an important thing is not to have standalone ideas in separate paragraphs, right? So transitions between paragraphs are very important, okay? So you want to lead the reader into the next thought in the next paragraph. And if you look at page 341 in your textbook, then they talk about entrances and exits, all right? So I have to introduce the idea, and then I have to exit that idea so that it flows into the next idea. And they introduce the concept that you really want to use this transition, this entrance and exit, for paragraphs, for a section, or for the whole paper, right? So it's not just entrance and exit on the paper, it's for every little piece, right? So that the reader can follow your train of thought. It makes sense what's coming next. Is that kind of reasonable, Michelle?
Yeah, that'll be helpful.
Okay. So here I'm talking about your purpose statement because that's the thing that we're working on. And originally, this class led to a second research class where you would have written a lit review, but that got, like the men's soccer team, just got that push. So, but again, I think that the writing hints here pertain to any paper or project that you do, all right? So you want to make your argument, your reason for writing whatever it is you're writing, very clear to the reader. Don't make them try to guess at what you're doing, all right? So you don't want to leave it too long before you make that crystal clear to the reader, okay? Because otherwise they lose interest, right? And it's hard enough, as you're probably finding out, keeping your focus to read a really long research paper or chapter in a book without being bored by it. So, you know, we really want to keep it as concise but as interesting as possible. All right, make the ideas clear for the reader. And then we want to do a lot of drafts, okay? And this is something that I think as a master's student, we're not very good at. Certainly I wasn't initially very good at it until I got kicked hard a few times by my advisor. But you learn that this is important. It's kind of like practicing a motor skill, right? If I want to be good at the motor skill, I have to keep trying it, okay? If I want my paper to be good or I want my writing to be good, I have to keep trying it, I have to keep practicing. And so what that often means is that I have to do more than one draft of a paper before I submit it for a final grade, okay? That can be difficult in the situation within our context because many of you are at work full-time. If you're a full-time grad student, then your job is to draft, redraft, and keep drafting until it's really good, right? But it's difficult to make time for that with a full-time job, but the idea is there. Try to get ahead so that you do at least a draft that you can get some feedback on before you do your final one, okay? in in my dissertation, I think I wrote my lit review 7 times. So, and the first time I got it back, it had so much red scribble on it, I shoved it in the bottom drawer of my desk and I didn't look at it for 3 weeks. Because I got it back and I was like, I worked so hard on this, and I shoved it in the desk, and I'm like, okay, that's it. I'm not looking at it. I don't want to know what she's got to say. All right, which was a silly attitude, but it was overwhelming. You know, I worked my butt off on that paper, and it came back with red scribble all over it. So I had never used red pen to grade when I grade in person, because it was like she was shouting at me off the paper. But you know, it's worth remembering that one journey starts with one step, right? So when I'm stuck with my writing, the idea is to just get anything you can down on paper, okay? That will help much more. And even if the first draft is a bit loopy and weak, you know, until you get that first draft written, you can't expand it and beef it up or clean up some of the grammar or clean up the flow of the idea in the paper until you have something on paper, right? So it's really important that we try not to get hung up on, oh, I've got to write something and it's got to be perfect. It hasn't got to be perfect first time. Just get the ideas down. Put them on the paper. Put the paper away and give your brain a break, and then come back and look at it again a day later, an hour later if that's all you have, right? Because when you come back and look at it, you'll go, what on earth did I mean by that? And you scribble that out, right? Or, oh, okay, I completely forgot that thing, and you can add something else in, right? So you don't want to just sit and go, blah, 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 press send and send it off. You can't expect to get the grade that you want, or maybe even the grade you deserve, if that's how you go, right? We've got to plan and build the work that we're submitting, all right? There's a really cool little quote in the textbook where they say, you know, there's not really any such thing as writer's block. What we have is reader's block, right? Which I think is actually quite an insightful statement. Oftentimes when we're stuck with our writing, if we had read more, the writing would be a little bit easier. But because our reading has been a little bit narrow, makes the writing quite difficult, right? Or we kind of know where we want to go, but we're not quite sure. If we read another paper, it might turn the light bulb on for us, okay? So, you know, just try to get something on paper. Expect to not be perfect, right? It takes practice and it takes many drafts to hand in something that's really, really good, right? The articles that you are reading in the journals have been through the same process, right? They went through draft, redraft, draft, 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 before they even submitted it to a journal. And it goes to a journal, the editor farms it out to reviewers. The reviewers read it and scribble all over it and send it back, and then you have to draft it again and send it back in, right? And if you're lucky, when they read it, when you send it back in for the second time, they go, oh yeah, that's good now, okay, we'll accept it. Or they read it and they go, scribble, 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 and they send it back and you have to draft it again and send it back to the journal. Right? So this is not an unusual process. It's just that we get caught up with deadlines in school, which unfortunately we have to have, right? and they're not always kind. Sometimes they're a little bit tight, those deadlines. And I don't know about you, but when I'm on a deadline, when I've got a clock ticking down, yeah, nothing is going on in my brain in that situation, right? It just goes, zoom, and I'm like, I don't know what to do, you know? So we just have to get anything down on paper. Once it's there, then we can start manipulating it and building with it, okay? It's very important at the graduate level that you pay attention to your grammar, your sentence construction, your spelling. Remember that APA has punctuation rules, but it does, that we are supposed to follow, okay? But also, it's not just that the rules are there, it actually makes it easier to read when the grammar and the sentence construction is well done, right? If the paper is very choppy or the sentences run over 10 lines, that's very difficult reading, right? It's even harder to grade, trust me, okay? So we want, again, it's all about, can I make the reading experience as pleasurable and easy as possible? Right? Check basics. 340. Let's see if I can find it now. That's what all these stickers are for, I believe. Okay, so this is what our textbook has to say about the basics of writing, all right? So technical aspects of effective writing, drafting and redrafting, and using technology. So, you know, find software that will help make sure that you've got Grammarly or some other kind of grammar check going on. Look at your sentence construction and your language. Make it as concise and clear as possible. We don't need great big long run-on sentences. Okay? Headings and subheadings can create what they call a conceptual map. So they help the reader navigate, especially if it's a study that you're writing or a project. If I have headings, it helps the reader navigate through and understand your thought process more, okay? Use paragraphs, link paragraphs, right? So make sure that you've got your exits and your entrances with your paragraph, so because that improves the continuity of the paper, all right? It means that that paragraph isn't suddenly a blob on the page on its own, right? When to write the conclusion, when to write the introduction. Oftentimes the intro is the last thing that you do, right? Because the rest of the writing is part of the process. You can't introduce what you've done before you've done it, right? So as I said, this book is very kind of basically written. It's real easy to read, but it's got some very useful tips, okay? And then the mistakes, where are the mistakes? And then they're here on this page somewhere. Oh, here we go. Last paragraph. So, while it's crucially important to get the basics right, they also highlight some common mistakes. So, common mistake number one, not including ghastly grammar, punctuation that's incorrect and things like that. That's obviously mistakes, but they're talking about in addition to those, okay? So their first mistake is padding. So padding is when you write and write and write, and it doesn't really pertain to the paper, right? So the undergrads do this. They always want to know what the page length is for anything they write. And I'm like, it's as long as it takes to tell me what you know, or as short as it takes to tell me what you know, right? They hate that when I say that, because they want a page limit. But you give them a page limit, and then what you get is waffle, 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 waffle. And they hand in 5 pages, and there's nothing there that says anything of any use, right? So that's padding. The next one is repetition. So that's another one we get a lot with undergrads, right? Hopefully not so much at the graduate level. Hopefully you guys are ironing out your writing style. So repetition. So I've made my point, but it doesn't look like enough writing on the page, so I'm going to say it again, and maybe even again, until I can hand in a whole page of one thing, right? And then we have saying too much. So I think that what they mean by saying too much is kind of the problem you guys are facing with learning how to summarize, right? There's so much information in the research paper. Which things are the highlight? Which are the key things that I need to put in the summary? And so it's difficult to narrow down. That's why I like the word limit for you, because it makes you really think, okay, is that crucial or is that secondary, right? And then the final avoidable error is failing to leave some time between finishing writing, having a cooling off period, and sending the paper in for submission. Okay? So this is really important that you don't press send, right? So don't put yourself in a situation where the deadline is 11 o'clock and you are starting your assignment at 9. So you have no option but to press the send button as soon as you finish, right? That is a big mistake, right? It's always best to give yourself, even if it's only half an hour, right? A day is better, but always try to give yourself a period of time between finishing and sending it, and then give it one more read through before you send it off. Okay? So, again, I know it's difficult when you've got a full-time job. I was very fortunate to be a full-time graduate student. I quit work in England and flew out to Alabama and spent 5 years being a student. It was very nice. And I was very lucky to be able to do that. But you do want to try to find a way to take some time with your graduate work, all right? You should be here because you want to be here, because you're interested in the learning curve that you're going to get from the program. And that should be enjoyable. Learning is meant to be fun, right? Learning is not meant to be a chore. So sometimes it becomes a chore because we're in a crunch and the deadline is right there, right? So try to back yourself off a little bit and give yourself a little bit more time so that you can enjoy the creative process of writing, right? Even if writing is hard, there's still a creative process of putting the thoughts together, right? Even if the getting of the thoughts down on the paper is difficult, there should be an enjoyable element there, right? Make sure that you review your work carefully. Again, that just comes back to don't press the send button as soon as you finish the paper. Right? That is not going to be pretty. If you have a colleague or a friend who has the time to read your paper through, that's always useful, because when you read your own work, your brain plays tricks on you, right? You read what you think you wrote on the paper. Your friend will read what you actually wrote on the paper, right? And that may not make very much sense, okay? So you should be able to give your paper to someone who knows nothing about the subject, and they should be able to at least grasp the idea that you're trying to put across. Okay? It doesn't have to be the idiot's guide to, but someone outside your area of expertise should at least be able to follow your train of thought. Okay? So that's why it's always useful to get someone else to read it if there's time and if you have someone who's willing to. And then if they do that for you, you owe them pizza, right? Don't forget you owe them pizza, because that's a big deal, right? They gave up their time to help you out. Okay, and then the last two slides again were geared towards writing your lit review, so I'm not going to go through that because now we don't have this 3-chapter proposal that you have to write anymore. But there is a very, very brief summary here to help you and present controversy. That's always a good idea. So, I said it was short. That was short. But, as I said, it's really just some hints and tips to help you, right? You don't have to use your whole summary to support your purpose statement if you were going to write the lit review. You could use the idea, you could just use the author's name so that someone can go back and look at that paper and see the connection for themselves, right? It really depends how you're trying to use the backup that you've got. Does that help at all?
Yeah, it does.
You know, and most of us will offer to read drafts, you know, and give feedback if we have time. Time is always a bit of an issue here because they have us well loaded as faculty. It's not like being at UNM where your faculty member might only teach 1 or 2 classes a week, right? I teach every single day, and on Thursday I teach 3 classes. So, you know, actually most of the week I teach 3 classes every day. So, you know, it's a little bit different. We can't compare us to people at a big university. But we do try, you know, I think all of us in this department are willing to try and give feedback when we can. It's not always possible. I mean, I have had drafts in and I just don't have time to look at them before the deadline. You know, that happens. But it's not because I ignored it or I didn't want to, it's just there's just too many balls up in the air. Okay? But it's always worth asking because, you know, if there is a window of time where I could take 20 minutes to skim through something you send me, then that can be helpful. Right? So it's worth asking. We don't always get what we ask for, but we do at least try. So, any questions?
No, I'm good.
Good, okay. I have not downloaded AnnoBibs yet, talking about time. They're about 4th on my grading list right now, so I will try to start them over the weekend if I can drag myself away from the tennis finals that are on in Miami at the weekend. What else? On the syllabus, the next few weeks say 1-to-1 appointments. What I mean there is that if you want to, I'm available with some warning, of course, to meet with you one-on-one about your annotated bibliography number 2 and or about your presentation as your final assignment. All right? So you don't have to, but I would recommend it. You know, the more you talk to me, the more information you've got. So I think I've given you 3 weeks there to start formulating your annotated bibliography number 2 and make a start on maybe putting an outline together for your presentation. There was something else. It went away. Come back. On Thursdays, those 3 weeks where it says that on the syllabus, we won't have a formal class, but I will dial in to the classroom and be there probably until around 6 o'clock or so, unless there's a lot of interest. But I'll dial in and be available in case you just want to jump in and ask a question. And if that doesn't work, you can make an appointment as I say, that's why I've put that there. So it gives you, hopefully, I'm trying to support what I say here, right? Trying to create some time, some space for you to enjoy the process of annotated bibliography number 2 and the presentation. Okay?
Okay.
So, I think that's it. Short and sweet. Yeah, I will get those AB1s back as quick as I can, but do start on, you don't need AB1 back to get started on AB2, all right? Look at the guidelines for AB2 because the first thing you've got to do is take everything out of the template and put it into just 1 paragraph, right? You've also got to add 2 more articles, so you could make a start on summarizing your additional 2 articles. If you are still feeling a little unsure about the summary, you can always summarize those articles into the template first so that you've got those guidelines and then put them into a paragraph. Okay? There's some options for you to keep going. Just don't wait on me because then it's going to be a crunch, right? So I think that's it. I think that's all I had for today.
All right, well, sounds good, thank you. And I'm gonna start planning.
Okay. Have a great evening. I'm gonna go put all my stuff away and walk home in the sunshine because it was just too nice an afternoon to drive. So I'm gonna go walk home.
Oh, nice.
Okay. And just just give me a yell if you've got questions or you want to have a meeting. You know how to reach me.
Yes, indeed.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Stay safe.